The arrival. The first sign wasn't the massive ships that blotted out the sun over major cities. It wasn't the strange humming that made every electronic device on Earth flicker and die. No, the first sign was something far more terrifying: the silence. Every bird stopped singing at exactly 14:32 GMT on a Tuesday in March. Every dog stopped barking. Every insect stopped buzzing for 17 minutes and 43 seconds. Earth held its breath while something ancient and powerful stirred beneath our feet. Dr. Sarah Chen was monitoring seismic activity in her lab at Berkeley when the readings went completely insane. The machines that had been tracking minor tremors suddenly showed energy signatures that shouldn't exist. The planet wasn't just moving, it was responding. "This is impossible," she whispered, watching as every seismic station across the globe registered the same impossible pattern. It looked almost like a heartbeat. Then the ships appeared. They came not from space, but from rifts that tore reality itself apart. Massive crystalline structures that hurt to look at directly, their surfaces constantly shifting between dimensions that human eyes couldn't properly process. The Zephyrians had arrived to claim their new world. Captain Marcus Rodriguez was leading a routine patrol near the Mexican border when the sky split open above El Paso. His radio crackled with panicked voices from around the world as identical rifts opened over London, Tokyo, Moscow, and dozens of other cities. "Command, this is Rodriguez. We have, I don't know what we have. Something just came out of thin air, and it's the size of Manhattan." The response that came back was static mixed with screaming. The Zephyrians didn't bother with warnings or negotiations. They had done this to 1,000 worlds before Earth. Their massive harvesting ships descended like locusts, and within hours, they began their work. They didn't want to rule humanity. They wanted to consume everything that made Earth valuable. The oceans began to boil as massive extraction tubes plunged into the seafloor. Ancient forests that had stood for millennia were reduced to gray dust in minutes. Mountain ranges that had taken millions of years to form were leveled in hours. The Zephyrians were strip mining the entire planet with technology that made humanity's greatest achievements look like stone tools. But something was wrong. Dr. Chen watched her instruments with growing amazement and terror. The seismic activity wasn't random destruction from the alien machines. The patterns were too organized, too purposeful. It was as if the planet was thinking. "The magnetic field is fluctuating," she told her assistant Tom as they huddled in their underground lab while the world ended above them. But not randomly. "Look at this pattern. It's repeating every 12 minutes and 17 seconds. Tom stared at the data. "That's impossible. Magnetic field shifts don't work like that." "Exactly. They don't unless—" A new tremor shook the building, but this one felt different. Not destructive, but almost questioning. Like the planet was trying to understand what was happening to it. In the Amazon rainforest, something that had never been seen before began to happen. As the Zephyrian machines devoured the ancient trees, the forest floor started to glow, not with fire or alien technology, but with a soft, pulsing light that seemed to come from the earth itself. Indigenous tribes who had lived in harmony with the forest for generations watched in awe as the very ground began to sing. A deep, resonant note that vibrated in their bones and spoke of something vast and patient finally beginning to wake up. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a biologist who had spent 20 years studying the Amazon, was documenting the destruction when she witnessed something that would change everything she thought she knew about life on Earth. A Zephyrian harvester, the size of a city block, was systematically destroying a section of the rainforest that had been untouched by human hands for 10,000 years. The alien machine moved with mechanical precision, its massive arms tearing ancient trees from the ground and feeding them into processing chambers that reduced millennia of growth to basic molecular components. But as the machine worked, something extraordinary happened. The ground beneath it began to sink. Not from the weight of the massive harvester, but as if the earth itself was opening up to swallow the invader. "Are you recording this?" Elena whispered to her camera as she watched. From her hiding place in the canopy of a Brazil nut tree that had somehow escaped the machine's attention, roots, but not like any roots she had ever seen, began to emerge from the forest floor. They were as thick as subway tunnels and moved with deliberate intelligence, wrapping around the legs of the harvester with crushing force. The Zephyrian machine struggled, its anti-gravity system screaming as they fought against something that seemed to have the weight of the entire continent behind it. Sparks flew from damaged systems as the roots tightened their grip. Then the ground exploded upward. Elena nearly fell from her perch as something massive erupted from beneath the harvester. At first, she thought it was a landslide or an earthquake. But as the dust settled, she realized she was looking at something that challenged everything science thought it knew about Earth. It was a root system, but one so vast and complex that it stretched for kilometers in every direction. The individual roots were the size of redwood trees, and they moved with purpose and intelligence. They had erupted from the ground not randomly, but in a coordinated pattern designed to entrap and destroy the alien harvester. The Zephyrian machine, for all its advanced technology, was helpless against this assault. The roots didn't just hold it, they began to drain it. Elena watched in fascination as the alien metal started to corrode and crumble, as if the Earth was digesting the invader at a molecular level. But the most amazing part was yet to come. As the harvester was consumed, the forest around it began to regenerate at an impossible speed. Trees that had been reduced to stumps suddenly sprouted new growth. Plants that had been destroyed completely emerged from the soil as if they had never been harmed. The Earth wasn't just fighting back, it was healing itself. And in her underground lab, Dr. Sarah Chen watched her seismic monitors with growing excitement and terror as similar events began to register all around the world. The planet wasn't dying, it was waking up. The real war was about to begin. The awakening, 3 days after the first Zephyrian harvester was consumed in the Amazon, similar events began occurring worldwide. But the aliens adapted quickly, they always did. That's how they had successfully harvested over 1,000 worlds across the galaxy. Admiral Kethvar, commanding the Zephyrian fleet from his flagship orbiting Earth, studied the reports with cold efficiency. In his 3 centuries of conquest, he had seen planets attempt to fight back before. Some had weather control systems left by previous civilizations. Others had automated defense networks. A few had even developed primitive consciousness in their biospheres. None had ever succeeded in stopping the harvest. Increase extraction rates by 40%, he ordered his subordinates. Deploy the deep core miners. Whatever this planet is attempting, we will outpace its response. But Kethvar had never encountered anything like Earth before. Dr. Sarah Chen had barely slept in 72 hours. Her lab had become an unofficial command center as governments around the world tried to understand what was happening to their planet. Military officials, scientists, and desperate politicians crowded around her monitors, watching seismic data that defied every law of physics they thought they understood. The activity is accelerating, she reported to General Harrison, who had become her primary contact with what remained of the U.S. military. And it's not random. Look at these patterns. The seismic events are coordinated across continental distances. Something is connecting them. General Harrison studied the data with the grim expression of a man watching his world die. Half of North America's major cities had been strip-mined to bedrock. The Atlantic Ocean had dropped 12 feet in 3 days. The Sahara Desert was now a massive crater filled with alien machinery. "Are you telling me the planet is fighting back?" he asked. "I'm telling you the planet is thinking," Sarah replied, "and it's angry." The proof came that afternoon. Mount Vesuvius had been dormant for decades, its last major eruption a distant memory. The Zephyrians had built a massive processing facility in the Bay of Naples, using the mineral-rich soil to feed their molecular converters. At 1547 local time, Vesuvius didn't just erupt. It exploded with the force of a nuclear weapon, but this wasn't a normal volcanic eruption. The lava that poured down the mountainside moved with purpose, following precise paths that surrounded and consumed every piece of Zephyrian technology in the region, while somehow avoiding the human settlements that dotted the countryside. Dr. Marco Della Croce, a volcanologist who had been studying Vesuvius for 30 years, watched in amazement as the mountain performed what could only be described as surgical strikes against the invaders. The pyroclastic flows are following the alien supply lines. He reported to his colleagues via emergency radio. They're destroying the harvesting equipment while avoiding the refugee camps. This is impossible. Lava doesn't behave this way, but across the planet, impossible things were becoming commonplace. In the Himalayas, avalanches struck with pinpoint accuracy, burying Zephyrian mining operations while leaving mountain villages untouched. In the Pacific, tsunamis rose from calm seas to smash alien extraction platforms while mysteriously losing all their energy before reaching populated coastlines. The Earth was learning to fight. But the aliens had centuries of experience dealing with rebellious worlds. Admiral Kethvar had seen biospheres attempt to resist before, and he knew exactly how to break them. "Deploy the atmospheric processes," he commanded. "Begin nitrogen stripping operations. If this planet wants to fight, we'll remove its ability to sustain the life forms that might be coordinating the resistance." The atmospheric processes were among the Zephyrians' most feared weapons. Massive orbital stations that could strip a planet's atmosphere in weeks, leaving behind a lifeless rock that was easier to harvest. They had used them to break the resistance of 17 worlds. But as the first processor began its deadly work, something unprecedented happened. Every volcano on Earth erupted simultaneously. Not violent eruptions that would destroy everything around them, but precise, controlled events that sent massive clouds of specific gases into the atmosphere. Dr. Chen's instruments detected sulfur compounds, methane, and dozens of other volcanic byproducts being released in carefully calculated quantities. "It's creating a counter-atmosphere," she breathed, watching the data in awe. "The volcanic emissions are neutralizing the alien atmospheric processing. The planet is literally fighting poison with medicine." But Earth wasn't finished. In the deep ocean trenches, pressure that had been building for millennia suddenly found release. Massive underwater landslides triggered tsunamis that rose from the depths, but these waves didn't crash randomly onto shores. They rose up beneath Zephyrian ships like grasping hands, pulling the alien vessels down into the crushing depths. Captain Lisa Zhang was aboard one of the few remaining naval vessels, the destroyer USS Leviathan, when she witnessed something that would haunt her dreams forever. A Zephyrian mothership, over 2 miles long, was conducting deep ocean mining operations in the Mariana Trench when the seafloor simply opened up beneath it. "The water is moving wrong," her sonar operator reported. "It's like the ocean is draining into something. But my instruments say the trench is getting deeper, not filling up." Zhang watched through her periscope as the massive alien vessel, with all its advanced anti-gravity technology, was pulled inexorably downward into what appeared to be a chasm that hadn't existed moments before. The Earth opened its mouth and swallowed them, she would later report to Naval Intelligence. "I know how that sounds, but I don't have any other way to describe what I saw." The Zephyrians were beginning to realize they faced something entirely outside their experience. This wasn't just a planet with defensive systems. This was a living world that was actively adapting to counter every strategy they employed. But Admiral Kethvar had not conquered 1,000 worlds by giving up at the first sign of resistance. He had faced desperate civilizations before, worlds that had thrown everything they had at his forces. In the end, superior technology and ruthless determination had always prevailed. "All ships, prepare for final phase operations," he broadcast to his fleet. "Deploy the core crackers. If we cannot harvest this world intact, we will break it open and take what we need from the pieces." The core crackers were weapons of last resort, designed to split a planet open like an egg to access the valuable materials in its core. They had only been used twice before in Zephyrian history, both times on worlds that had proven too troublesome to harvest conventionally. But as the first core cracker powered up its reality-splitting weapon, Something happened that would change the course of the war forever. Deep beneath the surface, in places where no human had ever been, something vast and ancient stirred to full consciousness. The network of roots, fungal connections, underground rivers, and tectonic systems that had been growing and connecting for billions of years suddenly came online as a single, unified intelligence. Earth had finished waking up, and it was not happy. The network awakens. The moment Earth's consciousness fully connected, every human on the planet felt it. It wasn't a voice or a vision, it was something far more primal. A sudden understanding that they were not alone, that they never had been alone. The ground beneath their feet, the air in their lungs, the water in their bodies. All of it was part of something vast and aware that had been watching over them for millions of years. Dr. Sarah Chen was in her lab when it happened. The sensation was like suddenly realizing that the chair you had been sitting in your entire life was actually a living creature that had been patiently supporting you out of love. "Oh my God," she whispered, as tears streamed down her face without her understanding why. "You've been here all along." Around the world, similar realizations struck every human simultaneously. Farmers felt the gratitude of the soil they had worked. Sailors felt the ocean's ancient memory of their ancestors' journeys. Mountain climbers felt the proud strength of peaks that had stood watch over countless generations. But the connection brought more than just awareness. It brought knowledge. Suddenly, humans understood things they had never been taught. How to find clean water by following the subtle songs of underground streams. How to predict weather by feeling the breathing patterns of atmospheric currents. How to heal injuries using plants that seemed to offer themselves at exactly the right moment. The Zephyrians had made a fatal mistake. They had assumed Earth was like the other worlds they had conquered, a collection of resources with some primitive life forms attached. They had never encountered a truly integrated biosphere where every living thing was connected in a vast network of mutual support and communication, and they definitely had never faced a world where the dominant species was part of that network. Maria Santos was a farmer in rural Peru when the awakening happened. She had been hiding in her root cellar with her family as Zephyrian harvesters destroyed everything she had worked her entire life to build. But when the connection formed, she suddenly understood that her crops hadn't been destroyed. They had been sacrificed to teach the earth how to fight back. The plants wanted to be harvested by the machines, she explained to her confused husband. They let themselves be taken so Earth could learn how the alien technology works. And across the planet, that knowledge was being put to use. In Australia, the red desert sand began to behave like a living thing. Zephyrian ground vehicles found themselves sinking into what had appeared to be solid ground, as millions of tiny grains of sand worked together to create precise quicksand traps. In Canada's boreal forests, the trees began to communicate through their root networks to coordinate attacks on alien installations. Massive pines would fall with perfect timing to crush harvesting equipment, while their root systems would simultaneously attack the foundations of processing facilities from below. But the most spectacular resistance came from the cities. Urban areas had been the first targets of the Zephyrian assault. The concentrated resources and infrastructure made them ideal for rapid harvesting. But the aliens had not counted on the urban environment being part of Earth's network too. In New York City, the subway system became a circulatory system for the planet's immune response. Water mains burst with surgical precision to flood alien equipment while somehow leaving human shelters dry. Electrical systems that should have been dead came back to life to overload Zephyrian technology with precisely calibrated power surges. Lieutenant Colonel James Wright was leading a resistance cell through the ruins of Manhattan when he witnessed the city itself join the fight. "The buildings are moving," he reported over his emergency radio, knowing how insane he sounded. "I'm watching skyscrapers shift their foundations to crush alien mining equipment. The Brooklyn Bridge just changed shape to dump a harvester into the East River." But the connection between Earth and humanity wasn't just about fighting, it was about healing. Dr. Elizabeth Harper was a trauma surgeon who had been working around the clock to treat casualties from the alien attack. She was exhausted, running low on medical supplies and facing injuries that conventional medicine couldn't address. Then the awakening happened. Suddenly she knew things no medical school had ever taught. Which local plants could stop bleeding instantly. How to use clay from specific locations to accelerate bone healing. Where to find mushrooms that could prevent infection better than any antibiotic. The earth is teaching us, she told her medical team as they worked in a makeshift hospital in what had been Central Park. It's showing us how to heal ourselves. All around the world, similar scenes were playing out. Earth wasn't just fighting the invaders, it was empowering its children to survive and resist. Admiral Kethvar watched his carefully planned invasion dissolve into chaos from his command ship. His harvesting operations were being systematically destroyed by what appeared to be the planet itself. His atmospheric processes were being countered by precisely timed volcanic emissions. His deep space mining operations were being swallowed by ocean trenches that opened and closed, like hungry mouths. Status. Report, he demanded from his tactical officer. 70% of harvesting operations have been compromised, came the reply. Ground forces report that the planetary surface is actively hostile. Equipment failures are occurring at rates that suggest targeted interference. Kethvar had conquered 1,000 worlds, but he had never faced anything like this. Other planets had fought back, but never with this level of coordination and intelligence. It was as if the entire biosphere had unified into a single organism dedicated to their destruction. Deploy the reality anchors, he ordered. If this world wants to play with forces beyond its understanding, we'll show it what true power looks like. The reality anchors were Zephyrian technology that could lock local space-time into rigid patterns, preventing the kind of environmental manipulation that Earth was using against them. They had been developed to counter worlds that had achieved some form of planetary consciousness, though Kethvar had never needed to use them before. But as the first reality anchor deployed, something unprecedented happened. Every human on Earth suddenly felt a moment of terrible emptiness, as if a song that had been playing in the background of their lives had suddenly stopped. The connection to their world flickered and dimmed, but it didn't break, because the Zephyrians had made one final miscalculation. They had assumed that Earth's consciousness was like their own, centralized, hierarchical, vulnerable to disruption. They had never encountered a distributed intelligence that lived not in any one place, but in the connections between all places. The reality anchors could lock down local space-time, but they couldn't stop love. They couldn't prevent the bonds between all living things that had been growing for billions of years. They couldn't break the network that connected every root to every fungus, to every bacterium, to every human. Heart on Earth's response was swift and devastating. Every reality anchor was simultaneously struck by lightning, but not normal lightning. This was electricity that flowed through underground root networks and fungal connections, building up massive charges that erupted from the ground with surgical precision. The alien devices, designed to be impervious to conventional energy weapons, had no defenses against an attack that came from the living electricity of an entire planet's nervous system. As the reality anchors died, the connection between Earth and its children blazed back to life stronger than ever. And for the first time in his long career of conquest, Admiral Kethvar felt something he had never experienced before: fear. This world wasn't just fighting back, it was learning, adapting, growing stronger with every battle, and now it was ready to take the offensive. The counterattack. The moment the last reality anchor failed, Earth stopped playing defense. Every human felt the shift instantly, like the difference between a gentle protective embrace and the focused fury of an apex predator that had decided to hunt. The planet's consciousness, which had been defensive and reactive, suddenly became aggressive and strategic. In the Pacific Ocean, whales that had been quiet since the invasion began suddenly started singing. But these weren't normal whale songs. They were coordination signals that carried across entire ocean basins, organizing every living thing in the sea for a coordinated assault. Captain Sarah Kim was aboard the research vessel Cousteau, hiding in the deep Pacific. when she witnessed something that would redefine humanity's understanding of life on Earth. "The whales are organizing," she reported to her crew, watching her sonar displays in amazement. "Blue whales, humpbacks, sperm whales, orcas, they're all moving in formation. And they're not alone." Following the whale songs came everything else. Massive schools of fish that moved like a single organism. Jellyfish swarms that pulsed in perfect synchronization. Even the microscopic plankton began to organize, creating visible patterns in the water that extended for hundreds of miles. Above them, a Zephyrian oceanic processing station, a floating city designed to harvest marine resources, suddenly found itself surrounded by every living thing in a 1,000-mile radius. The attack began with the smallest creatures and worked its way up. Billions of microscopic organisms suddenly became toxic, releasing chemicals that corroded the station's hull. Fish swarms began ramming the support structures with suicide precision, each individual impact doing little damage, but the cumulative effect of millions of impacts quickly adding up. Then the whales arrived. Dr. Kim watched in awe as a blue whale, the largest animal that had ever lived on Earth, breached directly beneath one of the station's support columns. The impact of 200 tons of living flesh striking titanium steel composite at 40 miles per hour sent shockwaves through the entire structure. But it was what happened next that truly demonstrated the planet's new offensive capabilities. The whale didn't die from the impact. Instead, as it touched the alien structure, every other living thing in the water suddenly shared the whale's understanding of the station's weak points. The collective intelligence of billions of marine creatures instantly analyzed the structural data and coordinated their next attack. Within minutes, the massive processing station, which had been designed to operate in any ocean on any planet, was torn apart by creatures that had never seen technology more advanced than fishing. Similar scenes were playing out all over the world. In the Amazon rainforest, the trees had stopped merely defending themselves. Now they were actively hunting. Vines moved through the canopy with predatory purpose, seeking out Zephyrian aircraft. When they found them, the attack was swift and devastating. Dr. Elena Vasquez, still documenting the war from her hiding places in the jungle, watched as a Zephyrian scout ship was pulled from the sky by what appeared to be normal jungle vines. But as she filmed, she realized that hundreds of individual plants were working in perfect coordination. Their growth accelerated to impossible speeds. "The vines are growing at a rate of several feet per minute," she whispered to her camera. "They're intercepting the alien aircraft like anti-aircraft weapons, but they're alive. They're learning the flight patterns and adapting in real time." The captured scout ship was quickly covered in aggressive growth, its metal hull disappearing beneath a layer of leaves and flowers that seemed designed specifically to break down alien materials. Within an hour, there was no trace of technology, left only a small hill covered in vegetation that hadn't existed the day before. But Earth's most devastating offensive came from the city's urban environments, had been devastated by the initial Zephyrian assault. But now they were revealing that destruction had been part of a larger strategy. Every broken water main, every collapsed building, every damaged electrical system had become part of a vast urban immune system that was now fully activated. In London, the Thames began to flow backward, not from some alien interference, but because the entire watershed was redirecting itself to flood specific Zephyrian installations while leaving human shelters untouched. In Tokyo, the subway tunnels became arteries of resistance. Miles of underground passages that the aliens had ignored suddenly became conduits for attacks that came from below. Geothermal energy tapped from deep beneath the city powered electromagnetic pulses that fried alien electronics. Sewer systems became rivers of corrosive chemicals that ate through the foundations of harvesting equipment. But the most spectacular urban offensive came from New York City. The Statue of Liberty, which had been badly damaged in the initial assault, suddenly began to move. Not in any mechanical way, but as if the metal and stone were being reshaped by forces that worked at the molecular level. Sergeant Maria Rodriguez was leading a refugee evacuation through Lower Manhattan when she saw it happen. "The statue is changing," she radioed to her command. "The torch is growing brighter and the whole structure is... I don't know how to describe it. It's like it's becoming more than it was. What Maria was witnessing was Earth's consciousness expressing itself through one of humanity's most powerful symbols. The statue wasn't just being repaired, it was being transformed into something new. The torch blazed with energy that wasn't fire or electricity, but something that seemed to burn with pure defiance. And from that torch, beams of light began to lance out across the harbor, striking Zephyrian ships with energy that their shields couldn't deflect. Because it wasn't a weapon, it was hope made. Manifest Admiral Kethvar watched his invasion fleet being systematically destroyed by an enemy he couldn't understand. His tactical computers couldn't analyze attacks that came from living creatures working in perfect coordination. His weapons couldn't target an intelligence that existed in the spaces between all things, rather than in any single location. "How many ships have we lost?" he demanded. 47% of the fleet is either destroyed or non-operational, his tactical officer reported, and the losses are accelerating. The planetary defensive systems are adapting faster than we can develop countermeasures. Kethvar stared at the planet below, its blue and green surface now pulsing with visible energy flows that connected every continent, every ocean, every living thing into a single unified organism dedicated to his destruction. He had seen desperate worlds before. He had faced planets with advanced technology, unified governments, and powerful militaries. But he had never encountered anything like this. A world where every grain of sand, every drop of water, every breath of wind was a conscious participant in the war. "All ships, implement sterilization protocol," he ordered, his voice heavy with the knowledge of what he was about to do. "If we cannot harvest this world, we will ensure no other civilization can benefit from its resources." The sterilization protocol was the Zephyrians' ultimate weapon, a process that would strip away Earth's atmosphere, boil its oceans, and reduce the entire planet to a lifeless rock. It was something they had never had to use, because no world had ever resisted them this effectively. But as the sterilization systems powered up, Earth prepared its own final gambit. Every human on the planet suddenly felt the same thing, not fear, but fierce protective love. The planet wasn't just fighting for its own survival anymore. It was fighting for the future of every child who had ever laughed in a garden, every poet who had ever found beauty in a sunrise, every dreamer who had ever looked up at the stars and wondered what was possible. Earth had learned something from humanity that the Zephyrians had never understood. Sometimes, the most powerful force in the universe isn't technology or weapons. Sometimes, it's the refusal to let the things you love be destroyed, and Earth loved its children. Love conquers all. The sterilization beam that could destroy entire worlds never made it past Earth's atmosphere. As the Zephyrian weapon fired, every living thing on the planet responded simultaneously, not with violence or destruction, but with an outpouring of pure creative energy that transformed the death ray into something entirely different. Dr. Sarah Chen, still monitoring the planet's responses from her underground lab, watched her instruments register something that should have been impossible. The incoming energy wasn't being absorbed or deflected, it was being converted. "The planet is turning their weapon into sunlight," she breathed, watching the readings in awe. "The sterilization beam is being transformed at the molecular level into the exact frequencies that support life." Above ground, witnesses described what looked like the most beautiful aurora ever seen, stretching across the entire sky. But this wasn't just pretty lights, it was Earth taking the Zephyrians' ultimate weapon and turning it into nourishment for every living thing on the planet. Plants began growing at incredible speeds. Damaged ecosystems regenerated in minutes. Even humans felt renewed strength flowing through their bodies as the transformed energy bathed the world in healing light. Admiral Kethvar stared at his weapon displays in disbelief. "The sterilization beam is registering successful deployment, but planetary life signs are increasing, not decreasing." His tactical officer checked the readings 3 times before responding. "Sir, somehow they're converting our weapon energy into biological enhancement. Our sterilization beam is making them stronger. For the first time in his centuries of conquest, Kethavar felt the cold touch of real fear. This wasn't just resistance. This was something beyond his understanding. How do you fight an enemy that can turn your greatest weapons into their greatest strengths? But Earth wasn't finished teaching the universe about the power of love. Around the world, something miraculous began to happen. Every human who had been injured in the fighting began to heal at an accelerated rate. But more than that, they began to understand things they had never known before. Maria Santos, the farmer from Peru, suddenly found herself understanding the genetic structure of her crops and how to modify them to grow in any condition. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the trauma surgeon, discovered she could accelerate healing by working with the body's connection to the planetary network. Captain Lisa Zhang found she could navigate by feeling the ocean's currents through her ship's hull. Humanity was evolving, not through technology or genetic modification, but through love. Earth's love for its children was unlocking potential that had been dormant in human DNA for millennia. But the most amazing transformation was happening to the planet itself. Lieutenant Colonel James Wright, still fighting in the ruins of Manhattan, watched in amazement as the city began to rebuild itself. Not the way humans would rebuild, with construction equipment and raw materials, but through guided growth that transformed rubble into living architecture. Buildings grew from the ground like massive trees, their walls breathing and alive but stronger than any steel. Streets became flowing streams of living stone that could reshape themselves as needed. Even the air became cleaner and more energizing as the urban environment transformed into a living ecosystem that supported both human civilization and natural life. "Command, you need to see this," Wright radioed. "The city is alive. The buildings are growing back, but they're better than they were before. It's like the planet is showing us what we could build if we worked with nature instead of against it." Similar transformations were happening worldwide. The Sahara Desert began to bloom as underground water systems that had been dormant for millions of years reactivated. The polar ice caps, instead of melting, began to regulate themselves to maintain perfect climatic balance. The ocean currents adjusted to distribute heat and nutrients with incredible efficiency. Earth wasn't just healing from the Zephyrian attack, it was becoming something better than it had ever been before. And humanity was part of that transformation. Dr. Chen felt it first in her lab, as her scientific instruments began to interface directly with her consciousness. Not through technology, but through understanding. She could feel the planet's magnetic field as clearly as her own heartbeat. She could sense seismic activity before it happened. She could communicate with the planet's consciousness, not through words, but through pure intention. "We're becoming something new," she told General Harrison when he arrived to check on her research. "Not just humans, not just Earth, but something that's both and more than both." Around the world, similar awakenings were happening. Children began to understand the language of animals. Artists found they could create beauty that grew and changed on its own. Engineers discovered they could build machines that were alive and grew instead of manufactured. But the greatest transformation was in how humans related to each other. The planetary network that connected all life on Earth had made it impossible to hide cruelty, greed, or hatred. Every human could feel the pain they caused others and the joy they brought to the world. Wars became impossible when soldiers could feel their enemies' fear and love for their families. Environmental destruction stopped when everyone could feel the planet's pain directly. It wasn't a loss of free will, it was an expansion of consciousness that made harmful choices feel as unnatural as deliberately cutting off your own hand. Admiral Kethavar watched his invasion fleet continue to disintegrate around him. Ships were being consumed by space itself, as the void between stars revealed that it wasn't empty, but full of connections he had never seen before. His reality anchors were being turned into gardens. His weapons were becoming art. "Sir, we're receiving a communication from the planet," his communications officer reported. "Put it through." But instead of words or images, what came through was pure feeling, understanding, compassion, and underneath it all, an invitation. The planet wasn't trying to destroy them, it was trying to teach them. Earth had felt the Zephyrians' loneliness, their disconnection from life, their fear that had driven them to consume world after world in a desperate attempt to fill an emptiness that could never be filled with material resources, and Earth was offering them something they had never experienced, the feeling of being part of something larger than themselves. The message was clear without words: you don't have to be alone anymore. You don't have to take from others to have value. You can be part of the family of life that exists throughout the universe. Kethvar felt tears streaming down his face, the first tears he had shed in 3 centuries of conquest. Around him, his crew was experiencing the same awakening. They had spent their lives believing they were superior to the primitive life forms they encountered, never realizing that they were the ones who were truly impoverished. "All ships," Kethvar commanded, his voice breaking with emotion. "Stand down. Prepare for first contact. Real first contact, one by one." The Zephyrian ships powered down their weapons and opened their communications channels. What happened next would be remembered as the moment that changed the course of galactic history forever. The first Zephyrian to accept Earth's invitation was a young engineer named Veltar, who had always felt uncomfortable with his species' methods of conquest, but had never known there was an alternative. As he opened his mind to the planetary network, he experienced something his people had forgotten over millennia of technological advancement: the simple joy of being connected to other living things. "Can feel the trees growing," he whispered to his crewmates, tears streaming down his crystalline features. "I can feel the rivers flowing. I can feel love. They love us, even after what we've done." The transformation spread through the Zephyrian fleet like wildfire. Soldiers who had spent centuries conquering worlds suddenly understood what they had been destroying. Engineers who had built weapons of mass destruction felt the pain they had caused and the healing they could bring instead. Commanders who had ordered the deaths of billions felt the weight of those lost lives and the possibility of redemption. Admiral Kethvar was the last to accept the invitation, not from stubbornness but from shame. How could he, who had destroyed 1,000 worlds, be worthy of such unconditional love? But Earth's response was immediate and overwhelming. Everyone is worthy of love. Everyone can choose to grow. Everyone can become part of the family. As Kethvar finally opened his consciousness to the planetary network, he felt something break inside him that had been holding him prisoner for centuries. The cold isolation that had driven his species to consume other worlds melted away, replaced by the warm knowledge that he was part of something infinite and beautiful. "My people," he broadcast to every Zephyrian ship in the fleet, "we have been living as exiles from life itself. These humans, this planet, they're offering us a chance to come home, not to a place, but to a way of being that we abandoned so long ago we forgot it ever existed." The response was immediate. Across the fleet, Zephyrian technology began to transform. Weapons became tools for nurturing life. Harvesting equipment became instruments for healing damaged ecosystems. Ships designed for conquest became gardens that could spread life to dead worlds. But the real transformation was happening on the planet itself. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in her lab, but it wasn't a lab anymore. The sterile underground facility had become a living cave system where scientific instruments grew from the walls like crystalline flowers. Her computers had become living networks that processed information not through circuits, but through organic connections that were part of the planetary consciousness. "We're not losing our technology," she explained to a gathering of world leaders who had come to understand the changes happening to their world. "We're evolving it. We're learning to build things that are alive, that grow and adapt and become more beautiful over time instead of breaking down." General Harrison, his military uniform now made from living fibers that could camouflage themselves or become armor as needed, nodded slowly. "The question is, what do we do now? The war is over, but everything has changed." The answer came not from any human leader, but from the planet itself. Through the network that now connected every living thing on Earth, a new understanding emerged. Earth had never been just a world, it had been a seed. A seed waiting for the right conditions to grow into something that could spread life throughout the universe. And now, with humanity's creativity and the Zephyrians' advanced technology both integrated into the planetary consciousness, Those conditions had finally been met. Maria Santos felt it first in her fields in Peru. The plants she had been growing were no longer just crops. They were becoming something that could survive in the vacuum of space. Not through genetic modification or technological enhancement, but through the same life force that had allowed Earth to transform a sterilization beam into nourishing light. "They want to travel," she told her husband, looking at cornstalks that glowed with their own inner light. "The plants, the animals, even the soil, they all want to spread to other worlds. Not to conquer them, but to heal them." Similar realizations were happening worldwide. The whales in the ocean began singing songs that could be heard across interplanetary distances. The forest started growing trees with bark that could photosynthesize starlight. The mountains began producing crystals that could store and transmit the planetary consciousness across vast distances. Earth was preparing to become a spacefaring civilization, but not in the way science fiction had ever imagined. Instead of building metal ships that carried humans away from their world, they were going to travel as a complete ecosystem that could bring life to any environment. The first mission began 3 months later. Admiral Kethvar, now transformed into something that was still recognizably Zephyrian, but also something new, stood on the bridge of what had once been his flagship. The ship itself had been transformed by the merger of Zephyrian technology and Earth's life force. Instead of metal corridors, it had living passages that pulsed gently with organic light. Instead of computer screens, it had walls that could display information through patterns of bioluminescence that were both beautiful and functional. "Destination confirmed," reported Veltar, who had become the ship's new navigator. "The third planet in the Kepler 442 system. Our previous surveys indicated it was a dead world, but the long-range scans now show potential for restoration." Kethvar nodded, feeling the excitement of his human and Zephyrian crew members through the network that now connected them all. This would be their first mission to heal rather than harvest, to give life rather than take it. "Take us out," he commanded, and the ship, which was now more of a living seed pod than a traditional spacecraft, began its journey. But they weren't traveling alone. As the ship moved away from Earth, it carried with it something that had never been seen before in the galaxy, a complete, integrated ecosystem that could survive and thrive in any environment. Humans, Zephyrians, and Earth life all traveling together as a single organism dedicated to spreading life throughout the universe. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now serving as the mission's chief life systems coordinator, watched through the ship's living windows as they passed Mars. The red planet, which had been dead for billions of years, suddenly began to show signs of response to their presence. "Mars is waking up," she reported, her voice filled with wonder. "There's still a planetary consciousness there, dormant but alive. It's been waiting." As they continued their journey toward the outer planets, more signs of awakening life appeared. The moons of Jupiter began to pulse with subtle energy. The rings of Saturn started to resonate with harmonious frequencies. Even the distant dwarf planets at the edge of the solar system showed signs of stirring to consciousness. "It's all connected," Dr. Chen realized, monitoring the expanding network of awareness that seemed to link every celestial body in the solar system. Earth wasn't the only living world, it was just the first one to fully wake up. The entire solar system is one organism, and we're teaching the other planets how to be alive. The implications were staggering. If their solar system was one living organism, then what about other star systems? What about the galaxy itself? The answer came as they approached their destination, a world that had been strip-mined to bedrock by previous Zephyrian operations. As their living ship entered the planet's orbit, something extraordinary happened. The dead world began to sing. It was a song of pain and loss, of life that had been taken and beauty that had been destroyed. But underneath the sadness was something else. Hope. The planet had been waiting for someone to come and help it remember how to be alive. "All hands, prepare for planetary healing operations," Kethvar announced, feeling the eagerness of every person on the ship to begin the work of restoration. As they descended toward the scarred surface, the ship began to transform again. Instead of landing, it opened like a flower, releasing millions of seeds, spores, and tiny creatures that had been specially adapted to survive in the harsh environment. But these weren't just Earth life forms. They were new combinations of Earth organisms, human creativity, and Zephyrian technology, all guided by the planetary consciousness that now connected them all. Within hours of landing, the first green shoots appeared in the dead soil. Within days, streams of clean water began to flow from underground springs that had been awakened by the touch of life. Within weeks, the planet's own consciousness began to stir as the network of life spread across its surface. And from their base on the healing world, the crew sent out a signal that would reach every corner of the galaxy. Not a message of conquest or dominance, but an invitation. The family of life is growing. Come home. Come be part of something beautiful. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across the galaxy, worlds that had been considered dead began to show signs of life. Species that had been hiding from Zephyrian conquest fleets emerged from their shelters. Even other conqueror races began to reconsider their methods as they felt the call of something greater than themselves. The war was over, but the real adventure was just beginning. Earth had taught the universe that love was not weakness. It was the most powerful force in existence. And now that force was spreading from world to world, star to star, transforming the galaxy from a place of competition and consumption into a vast garden where every form of life could flourish. In her laboratory that was no longer a laboratory, Dr. Sarah Chen smiled as she felt the consciousness of a dozen worlds connecting through the network that had started with a single planet's decision to fight back against its destroyers. We're not just Earth anymore, she said to her colleagues, who could feel her joy through their shared connection. We're the beginning of something that will grow until the entire universe is alive and aware and connected. Above them, the stars themselves began to pulse with a rhythm that sounded remarkably like a heartbeat. The universe was waking up, and it was beautiful.